There isn't a word in the English language for a parent who has lost their child. Widow and widower are used for those who lose a spouse. Orphan for a child without their parents. For a parent to watch their child die, however, it's beyond words. Bereaved parent is a proposed term, along with the Sanskrit term viloma, a word meaning against a natural order. Yet these aren't nearly as well known. It's an almost incomprehensible idea, so devastating and unthinkable that we have no way to vocalize such an ordeal. It's truly against the natural order of things to bury a child. No one should have to outlive their baby. Season 2 of Made in Abyss is about a mother helplessly witnessing her child die a preventable death. She's left in this stagnation and despair, in this suffocating pit of depression. Vueko is a young mother, adopting Irumyuui after the girl is cast out of her tribe. She sees a lot of herself in Irumyuui. Both were young girls considered impure in certain ways. Instead of letting this child be eaten up by whatever forces the abyss throws at her, Vueko adopts Irumyuui, and she has to convince the group that Irumyuui is useful, that she's healthy and strong and would be a benefit to the group, rather than simply, we should help her because she needs help. Nevertheless, she's able to adopt Irumyuui, and cares for her as they progress down to the 6th layer. Vueko sees herself in this child. She tries to turn things around for Irumyuui and give the girl experiences that she hadn't had. Juoimo stripped away any joys that Vueko had, but Vueko doesn't want Irumyuui to experience the same things. She may be projecting onto Irumyuui a little bit, but in this case, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It only strengthens Vueko's resolve to give Irumyuui a better life than she had. The job of a parent isn't only to make sure their child makes it to adulthood, but to forge a better future for them than they had. This projection leads to empathy, and Vueko will bring Irumyuui the comfort and love that she wishes she had from Juoimo. Vueko is going to break the cycle, or so she believes. No matter how hard you try, you can't protect someone from everything. As much as Vueko cared for Irumyuui and loved her, she couldn't have predicted the pseudo-water disease, which was the beginning of the end. If we look at the situation in isolation, disregarding the idea of the cradle of desire and how Irumyui's babies reversed the pseudo-water, this could be an allegory for the first step in a disease that is degenerating and killing Irumyuui. At first, she's in pain, she's feverish, she can't hold down any nutrients. The fever breaks and Irumyuui feels fine, but Vueko can see a physical deterioration. The girl is in pain once more, her body is changing and breaking down, and there's simply no cure. Finally, Vueko stands before Irumyuui with a knife, metaphorically holding her hand over the plug, about to pull. Her daughter is suffering, she can never live a normal life. She's going to die. Vueko wants to relieve Irumyuui of this suffering, but she can't do it. Irumyuui has become Vueko's anchor. This is her baby, she can't just let her baby go. But it happens anyway. Irumyuui is technically alive up until the end of the season when the village falls. But in Vueko's eyes, Irumyuui died once she scampered away, rooted herself down, and established the city of Iruburu. She can no longer cry out her suffering or tell her mother how much she loves her. This is a corpse. It is a corpse that can sustain the Ganja crew and one that gave birth to Faputa, and it is Irumyuui, but not the Irumyuui that Vueko knows. All of this is against the natural order. People can't mutate and become pillars of cities, but more importantly, Irumyuui should have outlived Vueko. She should have grown up. Vueko now must go on without her child. She's stuck in a pit. Physically, Wazakian kidnapped her and trapped her down there. But even if he didn't put her down there, Vueko would have been trapped in a pit anyway. That of depression, sorrow, and grief. Even if she was able to move about Iruburu freely, she would still be burdened with the pain that comes from losing her daughter. This sort of loss is a burden that you just can't shrug off. Vueko lost Irumyuui. She outlived her daughter and watched her die for the sake of the greater good. Irumyuui became a tool for Wazakyan and the success of Ganja, from the moment that Vueko advocated to protect her. At the very start, Irumyuui is proposed to be a tool to Ganja, rather than a person. Yeah, she ended up being helpful with her knowledge of the Abyss, but a person doesn't have to be useful to be worthy of help. Vueko saw her as a person in need, not as a tool or a guide. Censoring the death of Irumyuui on Vueko and highlighting the grief of a mother without her child is important, yet in turn, it ends up reinforcing Irumyuui as a tool and an object. She's an idea of safety in the form of the city, an idea of health in the form of providing the perfect panacea to counteract the pseudo-water, and an idea of prosperity. She becomes the fabled golden city at the bottom of the abyss. And in this, her personhood is stripped away. Season 2 of Made in Abyss is about a young girl dying a slow and preventable death for the benefit of others, as her pain is exploited, prolonged, and compounded. She becomes an idea of safety and resilience in the mind of others, yet it all comes at her expense. When confronting the interference units and asking about the cradle of desire, the units reveal that the wishes of adults are, quote, messy and complex. Children, however, are more viable to grant wishes. Children are much less complex, and their fears are primordial, according to some translations. I would assume primordial and closer to the origin mean closer to instinctive behaviors. A child would wish for basic, instinctual things such as safety and health. In being given the cradle of desire, Irumyuui is being reduced to her status as a child and the primitive, instinctual influences a less complex human would have. She's the idea of giving safety. Wazakyan says that she'll be their salvation. In life, Irumyuui was reduced to an idea, and if we center her death solely on Vueko, she's reduced to the idea of being a thing to grieve over, rather than her own person. Irumyuui's death and transformation into Iruburu is as much about her as it is about Vueko. Stripping her down to an idea is taking away her personhood, which resulted in Wazakyan's clinical and detached treatment of her. Taking away her babies the moment they're born and seeing them only as ingredients in a medicine disregards her emotional attachments. Part of the downfall of Iruburu involves the rage instilled into Faputa, rage and sorrow that Irumyuui felt towards Wazakyan. Standing tall inside the abyss, decorated with these banners and garlands, Iruburu reminds me of a monument. Irumyuui's effective death results in her transformation into a commemoration of her suffering and her sacrifice. Irumyuui being in the presence of Ganja in the first place is due to being exiled for being unable to bear a child. It's something that I believe is an innate birth defect rather than not yet reaching puberty. I've seen people suggest some rather unsavory ways of Irumyuui's family figuring this out, but I don't want to jump to that sort of conclusion. Conditions like vaginal agenesis involve the body not properly forming various parts of the female reproductive system. There could also be some sort of relic that can figure these things out. Irumyuui also, she seems quite small anyway. She seems like she would be 10 or 11 years old maximum. And though girls can hit puberty this early, this is more of a modern thing. It has to do with nutrition and all that. Over 100 years ago, the average age of hitting puberty was around 16 years old, actually. It also depends on what genetic background you have. Either Irumyuui's tribe develops quickly, or they were able to preemptively figure these things out before she would have started her menstrual cycle. My point is, I don't think Irumyuui was abused for her family to come to this conclusion. I don't want to get into the psychology of how she would act if she was, that's a whole other thing. But what matters is that even at this young age, Irumyuui was instilled with this idea that being able to give birth to a child is of utmost importance. She was cast out of the village for that inability. Not being a mother or having a baby, but the idea of giving birth. This is what resulted in her first wish, and it's a wish I think is a bit more worldly and grown up, as well as being a bit of a primordial wish. It's twofold. It both taps into higher level thinking that adults have, as well as the instinctual animalistic idea of reproduction. Vueko even instructs Irumyuui to lick off some of the natural membranes off of this newly birthed child, as a wild animal would do with its young. The children Irumyuui give birth to aren't human children. They resemble the hermit rat creatures that she had a pet for a brief time, yet with no features that would sustain it. Irumyuui didn't wish to have a child. She was given this idea that simply delivering a child was important, not the actual child rearing and life that would come with the birth. I think she started to grow these woody appendages because her wish was complex like an adult's. A kid her age shouldn't be concerned with having children, not for a long, long time. She was forced to grow up early, and thus her wish was more like that of an adult's, while also being simple like a child. The topic of reproductive health care, the right to choose whether or not to carry out a pregnancy, all that stuff, it's a pretty relevant issue in America right now. I'm not sure about what other countries are up to, because I'm American, and yeah, Made in Abyss is a story from Japan, but in general, reproductive rights are a worldwide issue. I'd like to clarify that by reproductive rights in healthcare, I mean everything that has to do with pregnancy and childbirth, female reproduction and all that. It's primarily a women's healthcare issue, but transgender men, assigned female at birth non-binary people, anyone who are capable of pregnancy are all impacted by this decision. And as a trans man, it impacts me. It's an issue that impacts anyone who can get pregnant, and some people who can get pregnant aren't women. With that out of the way, Irumyuui's story hits really hard. There are cases in the world of children giving birth to children. In looking up cases for us, there was a 10-year-old who was initially denied access to terminate her pregnancy. And I feel disgusted just reading that. I hope that girl is doing better now. I think it was a few years ago. There are cases of girls deemed too immature to terminate their pregnancies, but like mature enough to raise an entire human being. And like in these cases, I'm gonna be honest, these girls are seen as incubators. They're dehumanized, they're reduced to their uterus and the mass of growing cells within. In these judges' and politicians' eyes, the girl doesn't matter. She is a body that gives birth, but she's not a person to them. And that's what's happening to Irumyuui. It is not at all a bad thing that Irumyuui wishes to have a child someday, but that's something that should happen in the way future, not right now. Looking at how Irumyuui's children are born and then stripped away from her by Wazakyan, she's treated in a similar way. She's a body to give birth rather than a person, and even then, that body isn't really cared for. She's no longer a person or a body, but a manifestation of an idea. She, like those denied access to this healthcare, are boiled down to this singular idea. This nearly godlike veneration of Irumyuui strips away her personhood. She isn't a person who can be empathized with, but a representation of birth. And, as Wazakyan said, she's been so highly raised on a pedestal that she ceases to be the same as the people around her. And once you deny someone their personhood, it's very easy to treat them cruelly. Wazakyan takes away her babies right away, sometimes when they're still alive. To him, what matters is that Irumyuui gives birth, not her physical or mental health, not the well-being of the child, no matter how short its life would have been, or the opinions of Vueko, Irumyuui's family, that can speak for her. Irumyuui giving birth is beneficial to Ganja because, the meat of these children helps deter the pseudo-water, and it's not exactly a one-to-one comparison of the stuff going on in real life, but what's important are the emotions and the intent. These judges and authority figures passing decisions on these girls in real life, they're not concerned with the well-being of the girl or her potential child. They only care about the act of her giving birth. Who cares about prenatal health care, financial support, or anything else beyond her giving birth? Wazakyan doesn't even entertain the idea that Irumyuui is still conscious, even though she clearly is, and that these are living creatures she's giving birth to. They're not just ingredients. but he doesn't give her the little bit of comfort of letting her hold the child for a little bit until she's ready to give it up. These circumstances may not be the same, but the carelessness and the lack of compassion is. I'm going to state this in plain words so my point gets across. When other people make choices on your behalf, disregarding your own input or the input of your care providers, you lose your autonomy. Though Irumyuui can't speak anymore, Vueko is her mother, and she's given authority to speak when her daughter cannot. Wazakyan deciding what to do with Irumyuui's children is a denial of her autonomy. Judges and politicians passing laws on what healthcare you can access, your access to contraception, what you can and cannot do with your body, is a denial of autonomy. People who force others to terminate a pregnancy are denying autonomy to other people. And in denying autonomy, these people whose bodies are being dictated cease to be people. Others are determining that the only aspect of this person is that they give birth. It's dehumanizing. Once she's imprisoned, Vueko says to Irumyuui's children, as she vows to give each child a name. She comforts them on Irumyuui's behalf, yet she doesn't say anything about singing to Irumyuui herself, which at first seems a little strange, like this is your daughter. And that's because at the end of every episode, Vueko is singing to Irumyuui, and at the start, so is Faputa. I am not good at analyzing music. I tend to take things rather literally, but I am going to take a crack at analyzing Myth and Roid's Endless Embrace and Riko Azuna's Katachi as they pertain to the stories of this family. I'll be referencing the English translations provided by Katakawa's official channel for Endless Embrace and Annie Melody's upload of Katachi. I've seen certain sites have different interpretations of certain words, but the meanings are very consistent. Let's start at the end with Vueko's message to her daughter. This phrasing of warm darkness is something heavily associated with Vueko from the very beginning, after Belaf tells her that her dark eyes hold love and resilience. They seek longing and compassion. The warm darkness is, I believe, finding someone else in times of hardship and finding comfort in that hardship. Vueko says she's learned to love the warm darkness.
Irumyuui, 私ね、あなたに出会うまで探してたものがあったの。もう見つからなくてもよかった。暖かい闇が好きだった。二度とは戻らない。望郷の彼方。真の闇の中に誰にも見つけられなかった光は確かにあった。
As she longed for companionship, she found that in the form of Irumyuui, her daughter. And I think as she grew into her role as Irumyuui's mother, Vueko learned to love herself. And after all, Irumyuui is very similar to Vueko. If Vueko can't love herself, how can she provide this love for Irumyuui? The contrasting of the warm darkness and light of no salvation is a curious one. Typically, darkness is a metaphor for malignancy and evil, and light is noble and just, and in certain aspects, salvation. For light to be considered a lack of salvation, maybe this is a sort of destroying light. The title of this arc is The Golden City of the Scorching Sun. The sunlight that scatters across the sixth layer and of the village of Iruburu is cast upon superficial safety, and a safety that was literally built upon the back of pain and suffering. The Golden City in the light of salvation does not shine for Irumyuui nor Vueko. The rest of the song is a song of thanks from Vueko to Irumyuui. In this break of the natural order of Irumyuui's essential death, Vueko persists. She grips onto the hope and the love that her daughter gave her. Then there's the line, As opposed to warm darkness, this night of eternal sorrow is the wave of depression that overtakes someone when a loved one dies. Your love for someone doesn't disappear once their life ends. Vueko states how Irumyuui has lost her conscious thought, and all that remains is the raw, primal emotions of pain that later births Faputa. Irumyuui can't even hear Vueko's lullabies and understand them, but that doesn't stop Vueko from expressing her love for her daughter. I could go line by line and talk about how each message talks about how Vueko won't let her daughter's memory fade away. She's carrying on Irumyuui's dream in the form of comforting and protecting her children. Vueko is reassuring her daughter that despite all the pain she's feeling, she is still beloved. In turn, Katachi is a song validating Irumyuui's pain. Faputa has inherited Irumyuui's anguish and is fueling herself with a passionate rage to break the cycle and take back what was stripped from her mother. The term katachi initially translates to shape or form. In the lyrics, instances of the word are seen in phrases like if we're interpreting the song as coming from Faputa, she's the one taking shape, in the form of Irumyuui's pain and her vengeance. She's the culmination of the words that Irumyuui could not speak, and the cries that went unheard, and Faputa is going to make sure everyone hears it. Phrases like, "I'm wounded," and "let's replace pain with pain, I'll feed on it," are all about how Faputa is taking on this mantle that Irumyuui gave her. She says that she'll feed on the pain and be wounded, but that's what's causing her to become her. Faputa would not have been born if it wasn't for Irumyuui's pain and anguish. The flowers of fortitude are an abundant plant that can grow all throughout the abyss. Due to this resilience, these flowers are representative of pushing forward, of vitality, and of the cycle of life. Petals are scattered to the wind and shot from cannons during birthdays and celebrations, and mixed with ashes during festivals. These flowers celebrate a life well lived, and some could say that they travel down the abyss with lost souls to guide them on their journey of rebirth. And to make it down to the 6th layer, one needs to be resilient. They must be cunning, strong, and willful. They must be able to shoulder the pain and push through, and they need to take any luck and opportunity that comes their way. Perched atop a rock with her 5 tails flowing in the wind, Faputa's fur blooms like an eternal fortune. She is resilience, growing up only with Gabaroon in the unforgiving environment of the 6th layer. She is vitality, thriving despite all the odds. She is the next stage in Irumyuui's cycle of life in a way. Though Faputa is her own person, she could be seen as a spiritual reincarnation of Irumyuui, able to explore to her heart's content, and to be a curious kid like Irumyuui was denied. She doesn't have to grow up fast. Faputa persists through the pain, feeding off of it, and blooms into the shape of fortune. As Faputa joins Riko, Reg, and Nanachi on their journey to the bottom of the abyss, she's following her mother and grandmother's souls as they're returning to whatever primeval force governs this odd and unforgiving world. Made in Abyss, the Golden City of the Scorching Sun is a story about what matters most to this odd, disjointed family. A grandmother who, through finding her own self-worth, is able to stand up for herself and speak for someone who is voiceless. A daughter who embodies her mother's rage and pain to put her soul to rest. And in the middle of it, it's a story about a mother, as well as a daughter. A young girl whose own well-being was pushed to the side despite the persistent voice of her mother, whose pain and dreams were exploited without any sort of compensation or comfort. All Wazukyan had to do was let Irumyuui hold her children. All he had to do was extend some form of care towards her. It wasn't wrong of Ganja to put their faith in Irumyuui for their salvation. It was their last resort. Yet in this decision, desperation turned to indifference and into insensitive cruelty. The village of Iruburu speaks a language whose words change definition depending on context. 50% of the time, the word Iruburu itself means village, possibly derived from Irumyuui and the term boro, a term for a type of town. Essentially, it could be translated to Irumyuui city or city of Irumyuui. 40% of the time, Iruburu means cradle. In a sense, the village gently protects its people, balancing out differences and making things fair. It assists in a rebirth of humans and nurtures them, and it heals them, and it helps them grow and flourish. 90% of the time, Iruburu is a tool. The other 10% of the time, Iruburu means mother. Irumyuui is a mother who never got to embrace her children. She wanted to build them a home and wanted them to flourish, yet the cruel curl of the monkey's paw granted her an unstable facsimile of a home and of children. She became the protective cradle of a city for others to benefit from. It's both a true and a false statement to say that Irumyuui received no comfort or care. Wazkian treated Irumyuui with indifferent joy, seeing her as a way to further the goal of salvation. Bailoff cared more about his own values and his consumption of the children of Irumyuui than her own feelings. And even though he begs for her forgiveness, it's more about his own punishment rather than apologizing to her. Vueko tried her best to comfort Irumyuui. She stayed by her daughter's side and comforted her the best she could. And once she realized Irumyuui's condition would never improve, that this child would only suffer, Vueko had to make the hardest possible decision. For Irumyuui to stay alive would be to prolong her pain. Keeping her alive is a selfish decision, as it has no benefit to Irumyuui, only to the rest of Ganja. No parent should ever have to make the decision to let their child go. To be the one to bring them up in the world and help them flourish, yet to be the same person to extinguish that flame, is an unthinkable pain. The natural order dictates that Vueko uplifts Irumyuui and raises her to her fullest potential. Yet in suffering, sickness, and pain, she must go against the natural order and against her own comfort. It would be nice if Vueko's daughter was kept alive, but in this moment, this child isn't just Vueko's daughter. This is Irumyuui, her own person. A child whose life was always defined by her potential to birth a child, to further the lives of other people instead of her own. It's in Vueko's opinion that Irumyuui should be put to rest, yet is that even what Irumyuui wants? Why should Vueko strip one last bit of autonomy away from Irumyuui? Made in Abyss, the Golden City of the Scorching Sun is a story about autonomy and taking back one's sense of self. It's about finding comfort and compassion, and empathetic rage and anguish. It's about a mother who was forced to watch her daughter suffer and die, a daughter who knew nothing but the pain her mother went through, and, ultimately, a young girl whose deepest wishes were taken and twisted, and her body no longer being her own. Sometimes I feel like my body isn't my own, but rather something that I'm borrowing. When I look into the mirror, I don't really see myself, but like a thing to be dressed up by other people. My mother, even though I'm in my 20s, my mother, she has like a stronghold on what I wear. And I'm not quite sure what myself really is. Others tell me how to dress and act, what role I should play in society. The food I eat is criticized and picked off my plate. My appearance is judged at every moment. And like, in the midst of it all, I'm not sure who I really am. I feel like Irumyuui's story was, intentionally or not, a commentary on how people's bodies are dictated and exploited by others. She can't be herself. She has to have ideals instilled within her that her worth is defined primarily by her ability to produce children. There's a difference between a young girl wishing to be a mother someday and a young girl having this drilled into her head that she is worthless if she does not give birth. Female bodies are treated as a commodity. I could talk about the laws and legislations being passed, but it exhausts me. It just makes me upset. It's a big problem, and I know that there's all sorts of nuanced things, but I'm of the opinion that, like, don't get involved in other people's businesses. Like, stop dictating the bodies of people that you don't even know. To be boiled down to one's reproductive capabilities, or, the lack thereof, it's dehumanizing, reducing someone to a tool. Being able to have a child is a wonderful thing, but that's not the primary or sole use of a person. In fact, people shouldn't be used. We're a culmination of our thoughts, our passions, abilities, our connections and our experiences, our internal self and our external bodies. People are useful, but they should never be reduced to a single use. Sometimes I wonder if I'm looking too deep into the show. Maybe I'm projecting onto the characters and the author meant none of what I took away from the story. I personally believe that the true meaning of art is that art is a conversation. The artist has an idea in mind and weaves it together, and the audience is given the opportunity to figure out that idea. They end up weaving their own conclusions and ideals together. Just like in verbal conversation, ideas can become reinterpreted and misinterpreted. What an audience member derives from a piece of artwork is based on their own experiences in life, their cultural background, their personal ideals. And it is inevitable that this artist's initial idea will get rewoven into something new. And I think that's a wonderful thing. And this video is the tapestry of thoughts I wove, of the ideas pulled together and made in Abyss. I would love to hear what your own ideas are and what you took away from the story. Please be respectful, please stay on topic. It's kind of tiring to have to moderate the comments section when people are just like, oh, the author, he's just a creep, and if you watch the show, you're a creep too. Oh my god, I don't want to have to readjust my medication anymore because I can't function when I start to spiral and wonder if I'm secretly hurting people because I like this show. I want to have a serious discussion about these topics. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate it, and I hope things weren't too heavy. And I hope you have a nice day. Bye-bye.